The void did not just lack light. It possessed a weight that pressed against the chest. Ilara stood in the center of that absolute nothingness, her boots biting into the slick, freezing obsidian floor. There was no horizon. There was no ceiling. Only a heavy, suffocating shroud that clung to her skin like damp wool. She shifted her weight, the sound of her movement swallowed instantly by the surrounding gloom. The silence here was not merely the absence of sound. It was a physical barrier, thick and unyielding. She reached out, fingers brushing against the empty air, finding nothing but the biting chill of a place where time had ceased to function. Every breath she took felt like an intrusion, a fragile disturbance in an ocean of stagnant, ancient stillness. She remained fixed in the center, a single point of life in a vast, cold expanse of nothingness. Ilara raised her right hand. The movement was slow, deliberate, cutting through the heavy air. She held her palm upward, fingers slightly curled. She did not look at the darkness. She looked at the space just above her skin. She tightened her focus, pulling at the latent energy trapped within the cold. A single spark ignited at the tip of her index finger. It was tiny, a pinprick of gold that looked fragile against the crushing gloom. The spark flickered, dimming as if the surrounding cold sought to smother it instantly. She did not blink. She held her hand steady, grounding her intent, refusing to let the light die. The spark caught, flared, and settled into a rhythmic, steady pulse. It beat like a living heart, expanding slightly and then contracting with every cycle. The golden glow began to bleed into the immediate space, revealing the jagged texture of the stone for the first time. She watched the amber energy swirl, a miniature sun held captive in the palm of her hand. The pulse quickened, growing stronger, casting a warm, flickering radiance that carved a sanctuary out of the void. The golden sphere in her palm began to hum, a low vibration that traveled up her arm. As the amber light expanded, the absolute blackness surrounding her started to fray. Tiny specks of sapphire light detached from the shadows. They drifted toward her, hesitant at first, then accelerating as if caught in a sudden, invisible current. Ilara watched as the blue particles spiraled around the golden core, drawn to the warmth like moths to a flame. The air in the chamber shifted. It grew heavy, charged with the sharp, metallic scent of ozone and the dry tang of ancient dust. Each particle that touched the amber light dissolved, fueling the sphere. The hum grew louder, transitioning into a rhythmic crackle that echoed against the obsidian walls. She felt the pull of the energy against her palm, a physical resistance that required her to lock her wrist and brace her stance. The sphere was no longer just a light. It was a vortex. Blue light swirled in complex, interlocking patterns, weaving through the gold. The temperature in the chamber rose, the biting cold retreating as the energy field expanded. She stood at the center of this gathering storm, her focus absolute, watching as the shadows surrendered their hidden essence. The air was thick, vibrant, and alive. The energy reached a critical mass. The sphere was no longer a gentle pulse but a frantic, swirling knot of gold and sapphire that strained against her grip. Ilara felt the weight of it pushing back, a physical pressure that forced her to widen her stance and drive her heels into the obsidian floor. The hum had become a roar, vibrating through her bones and rattling the very air in the chamber. She took a breath, held it, and centered her intent. She did not hesitate. She thrust her right hand forward with a sharp, decisive motion. The sphere shattered. A shockwave of shimmering golden dust exploded outward, tearing through the suffocating gloom. It moved with the speed of a physical strike. In that heartbeat of release, the darkness vanished. The sudden light revealed the jagged, broken ruins of a massive chamber hidden for centuries. The shockwave continued to ripple, catching the edges of ancient carvings and turning the previously empty void into a landscape of sharp angles. Ilara stood amidst the fading brilliance, her hand still extended, watching as the light settled into the stone, finally exposing the scale of the space. A sudden, violent wind whipped through the cavern, catching her hair and pulling it back from her face with enough force to sting. Elara did not flinch. She kept her gaze forward, planting her boots firmly against the obsidian floor. The air felt heavy, like walking through deep water, pushing against her chest with every step she took. She leaned into the resistance, her movements slow and deliberate, maintaining a steady pace despite the gale. With every stride, the ground beneath her feet began to protest. Thin, jagged cracks spider-webbed outward from her footprints. From these fissures, bursts of raw, mystical energy rose into the air, swirling like glowing embers in the wake of her passage. The pressure in the chamber continued to mount, vibrating through the soles of her boots and rattling the loose debris. She pressed onward, the ground fracturing further with each movement, the air thick with the promise of an impending massive release of power. Elara stopped. The ground beneath her pulsed, the cracks glowing with a fierce, rhythmic intensity that matched her own heartbeat. She raised her hands, fingers splayed, feeling the static charge of the air against her skin. Invisible threads of raw power drifted through the chamber like spider silk caught in a breeze. She reached out, her movements precise and calculated, and grasped the air. Her fingers closed around the intangible currents, pulling them tight. The effect was instantaneous. The scattered sparks of light surged, drawn toward her grip as if pulled by a magnetic force. She twisted her wrists, weaving the threads together, and the darkness began to dissolve. A brilliant canvas of gold and sapphire erupted around her. She held the energy steady, her arms trembling under the immense weight of the light she had commanded. She stood at the center of the vortex, her posture rigid, her gaze locked on the glowing threads she had captured. Elara held the golden and sapphire weave, the air around her vibrating with the weight of the trapped energy. She narrowed her eyes, focusing on the center of the sphere. With a sharp, sudden motion, she clenched her fist. The expansive light did not dissipate. It buckled inward. The air pressure in the chamber plummeted, creating a momentary vacuum. The swirling sphere collapsed, shrinking rapidly into a single, blinding point of white-hot intensity. She thrust her arm forward, aiming the core toward the far edge of the void. The energy erupted. A concentrated beam of light tore through the gloom, a solid lance of brilliance that cut the darkness in two. It hissed as it crossed the cavern. The beam struck the distant wall with the force of a physical impact. The surface flared, revealing intricate, deep-cut carvings. Elara stood firm, her arm extended, guiding the beam. The entire chamber was now mapped in light, the secrets laid bare. The beam lost its cohesion, the solid lance of light fracturing into thousands of drifting shards. Elara kept her fist clenched for one final second, watching the last of the energy drain from the stone carvings before she released her grip. The light did not vanish instantly. It thinned, turning from a blinding lance into a soft golden haze that hung suspended in the stagnant air. The high-pitched hiss of the energy faded, replaced by the sound of her own steady breathing. Silence rushed back into the cavern, heavier than before. She lowered her hand, her arm dropping to her side with a slow, deliberate motion. As her fingers relaxed, the golden haze began to break apart. Tiny particles of light drifted downward like snow, swirling in the stillness before settling onto the obsidian floor. The air, previously charged with ozone, began to cool rapidly. She stood motionless, watching the last of the sapphire sparks flicker out against the cold rock. The chamber returned to its natural state, yet the atmosphere had shifted. She remained in the center of the ruins, her eyes tracking the final, dying embers of the magic as they faded into the dark. She exhaled, the sound crisp in the quiet. Elara turned. Her boots scraped against the obsidian floor, a sharp sound that echoed briefly before dying in the vast space. As she pivoted, the faint, lingering particles of magic responded to her motion. They surged, drawn toward her wake, and clung to the jagged stone surfaces of the tunnel entrance. The darkness that had defined this place for centuries was no longer absolute. A soft, sapphire glow traced the contours of the walls, revealing a path that had been invisible moments before. She took a step, then another, her movements measured and steady. With each stride, the light intensified, pulsing in rhythm with her gait. It was not a steady lantern, but a living guide that reacted to her presence. She reached out, her fingertips brushing the cold rock, and the stone flared with a pale, golden warmth. The path ahead stretched into the distance, no longer a void, but a corridor of shifting, luminous energy. She did not hesitate. She walked past the ruins, her silhouette framed by the sparks that danced in the air around her. The air grew thinner, carrying the scent of fresh, moving currents from beyond the chamber. She kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, watching as the glowing trail deepened, carving a clear route through the gloom. The energy she had released acted as a beacon. She reached the threshold of the exit, paused for a heartbeat to feel the shift in pressure, and stepped forward into the unknown. The light followed her,